Hello and welcome back to the training, and today we're looking at date and time functions. Date and time processing is a huge part of working with SQL. You'll use dates in one form or another in pretty much every query that you write. There are 5 key functions in SQL Server for date and time. Is get date, which we've already met, that returns the current date and time. The other ones are date add, date diff, date part and date name, and we'll be looking at each of those in turn and together, because when you combine these together you can do some pretty cool things. Okay, so let's create a new query and let's get started on dates and times. Now we've already seen this first one. Select get date. Now it needs the open and close brackets because it's a built-in function. So some built-in functions require some sort of input inside the brackets. Get date doesn't, because it just returns the current date and time. And every time you execute that, the seconds and the milliseconds increment. So that is the date and time to the year, month, day, hour, minute, second, and I think it's milliseconds, but it might be microseconds. Can't remember. Doesn't really matter. I mean, unless you've got a job recording Olympic track times, then you'll probably never go anything less than seconds. Okay, so now let's have a look at that in use. So we've already seen this. We said select star from employees where start date is greater than get date. Okay, so those are the future starters. Today for me is the 6th of July, so all those start dates are ahead of that date. Okay, the next one I want to show you is a thing called date add. So I'm going to put in fact I'm going to just comment that, get date, and the next one is going to be called date add. Now the clue's in the name really, but let's show you anyway. So date add requires 3 arguments. And what do I mean by arguments? Well, let me show you. Interval, increment and expression, and those are the values that need to go inside the brackets. So interval is a unit. So for example, day is an increment, is an interval. Increment is the number of days you want to work with. So I'm going to say 1. An expression is a date. So I'm just going to use today. I'm going to use right now, the get date, as my expression. So if I do that, what this is doing is it's saying date add of days 1 onto get date. So it's adding 1 day onto get date. So if we do this, so that first column is get date and that second column is the date add. So that one says it's the 6th of July and that one says it's the 7th because it's added 1 full day, even down to the millisecond. Okay, so what units, what intervals can we have in there? Well, you can have year. So we can add 1 year. So this time next year it will be the 6th of July 2023. You can add all the way down to minute. And there we add 1 minute, so 1823 instead of 1822. So that is date add. The next one is date diff. So date diff requires also 3 arguments, and they are interval, starting date and ending date. So we're going to say, so this basically tells us the difference between 2 dates and the interval is the unit. So let's go in days between, and let's say 2022 0101. So New Year's Day this year and today. So that tells me that it's 186 days since the 1st of January this year. Let's do that in weeks. So that's 27 weeks. Okay, so that's the difference in date. So again, that goes down to the second. You can only do it in seconds. Well, like a millisecond actually. So whatever number that is. $16,136,616. Okay, so the next two are very similar to each other, and they are date part and date name. So date part first. So the arguments required here, so we're going to say select date part and let's look at get date. That's the date, but the actual interval is going to be day. So that will return the day of the month, and it's the 6th of July, so it returns a 6. Let's now look at the month. So that will also return a 6. No, it won't, it'll return a 7 because it's July. And if we look at year, it will return 2022. Okay. Date name is very similar. So we're going to select date name, and if we were to do day of get date, and it doesn't have to be get date because it can be a field in a database or a fixed date, but we'll look at it in a database shortly. So that returns the day. Now that is the day of the month, but you can also say weekday, and that shows us a Wednesday. And if you put in month, you get July. If you put in year, you get 2022. Now, if we do date part of year, we get 2022. And if we do date name of year, we get 2022. So what's the difference? Well, there's a subtle difference. So one of the differences is that date part returns an integer, a number, whereas date name returns a string. So it's a string of characters. And that is a subtle but critical difference. And we'll come on to why that's important when we look at string handling in a few lessons' time. But the real thing that's really useful is this month thing, and the weekday, because it can return the actual descriptive value. Now what happens if we do weekday with date part? It returns a 4. Now today is a Wednesday, okay? So day 4 means that Sunday's day 1, Monday's 2, Tuesday's 3, Wednesday's day 4. Now that might not make a lot of sense to a lot of people. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But there's a way to change how it classifies each day of the week. So if we look at that now, so weekday of date part is a 4. If we run this and said set date first equals 1, now we run date part weekday and it's a 3. So what we've done there is we've reset the first day of the week to be a Monday, not a Sunday. And if we do that to 7, and then it goes back to day 4. Right, so let's have a look at some of those now in an actual query. Employees. So we've seen this where start date is greater than get date. Oops, I've run all of them there. Okay. But what about when start date equals get date? No rows returned. Now let's have a look and see if there is actually somebody with a start date today. What are we on? 7th No, so there isn't one with a start date of today. But what we can do is we can use our date add. Okay, so there's one there with a start date of the 10th of July. Today's the 6th. So if we go date add day 4, that, let's just test that before we run it. Select day 4, that is the 10th of July. So if I run that, what are we going to get? That one row returned? No, nothing. And that's because that value is a date and time function, and it includes the time. So the time is 6:30, whereas that start date is just a date, which means the time by default is 0 hours, 0 minutes, 0 seconds. So midnight, in other words. So even if there was somebody with the same date as that, well, there is, it's not going to work. So what we need to do is find a way of stripping out the time out of that query. And there's a way of doing that. So let's start with this. Select get date. Okay, that's now. And now let's say date diff between in days between day 0 and get date. So that's the number of days between day 0 and now. So what's day 0? Day 0 is the 1st of January in the year 1900. So that was 44,746 days ago. Now, what use is that to us? Well, if we add that number, that 44,746 days, back onto day 0, day 0 is at midnight, so it will bring us back to today at midnight. So if we say date add in day between that number and day 0, it brings us back to today, which is the 6th of July 2022, and it stripped out the time because we went right back to day dot, then right back to today. But in going back to day dot is midnight, 0 hours, minutes and seconds. So add those 44,000 and whatever back onto that, and we're back to today, but midnight. So that's really useful. So when you're comparing dates, that is something that you'll use a lot. Now, I have a file which I use all the time, and it's a notepad file, and it's called handycode.txt, and in there is bits of code that I use all the time. And right at the top of that file is that, because it is very, very common that you'll need to just select today, dates today, or ahead of today, or behind, or in the past from today. That's one you'll use all the time. Now that's what happens when we do it on day. It returns it to the start of the day. What do you think might happen if we did it on week? It takes you back to the 4th of July, which was Monday. That's the start of the week. Let's try it on month. First of July. And I think you know where we're heading with this. 1st of January 2022. So do you see how powerful this is? How useful it can be? So you might often have reports or analyses you need to run for the previous full month or the current full month. Well, easily you can get the start of the month, month to date, year to date. So with these, by combining date add, date diff and get date in a specific way, you can get any of these results really easily. Okay, so that is something that we'll be using a lot in the course of our studies. Okay, so that is the demonstration of those functions. Now I'm going to set you a challenge so you can put that learning into practice. Here it is. What is your age in days, weeks and months? And that's 3 separate questions. So remember here, you can hard code in a specific date. So what's your age in days, weeks and months? Show all records from the employees table where the start date is in the future. Well, we've just kind of covered that. Number 3, show all records from the employees table where the start date is between the first days and the last day of the current month. Okay, and question 4 is display the length of service for employees. Show this in 2 columns, full years and then months. So for example, 5 years in one column and 3 months in another. Okay, so have a go at those and see how well you do. So at this point in the program, you'd pause the video, do the challenge, and then come back to me and I'd go through the solution, talking about maybe various ways to achieve the right output. If anything was still causing you trouble in the program, you could jump on one of our group calls or even book in a one-to-one with me and we'd make sure you'd got it before moving on. The program is split into 3 sections and they're called walk, run and fly. And this lesson was lesson 4 from the very first walk module. So the whole thing is 30 lessons and you can go from 0 knowledge of SQL or very little knowledge to an advanced user in around 10 weeks if you devoted 3 lessons per week to this. So if that interests you, click the link in the description below to book a call and speak to me and we'll get you signed up if that's what is the right solution for you. So speak soon and take care.